I would like to call myself a considerable fan of American literature, and with that being said, I think it's actually quite surprising that I haven't read any Kurt Vonnegut yet. Him being one of the most prolific and quintessential American authors and postmodernists. And so I, like many people, decided to dip my toe in with his most famous book, Slaughterhouse-Five. I think when most people hear or think about Vonnegut, this is the book that comes to mind, even though I believe he has 14 other novels, maybe 13 and a half, because I think one was published posthumously. But yeah, Slaughterhouse-Five is it's a very interesting book. I didn't really know how to approach it. I knew I didn't know very much about it. Or I knew the bare bones going into it. I knew that it was about the firebombing of Dresden, and I also knew from other people they described it as a very fun book, as a wild ride, and just those two ideas, I had no idea how they were going to interact. How can a book about the firebombing of Dresden also be like a wild ride? How do those things like cross? And in reading it, I mean, I understand now, but going into it with no spoilers and no, or not that there is much to spoil, but we'll get into that. Going into it with no spoilers, I was like, how is this a wild ride? What are they talking about? I knew about time jumps and stuff, but I didn't realize I didn't realize it existed in the book the way that it did. So, but yeah, Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut is a narrative that follows this World War II soldier named Billy Pilgrim as he is deployed in... Where is he deployed? He wasn't deployed in Germany. He was brought there as a prisoner of war. I'm forgetting where... It might have been Belgium? That might be very wrong. I don't know as much World War II as I should. But he's an American soldier who was captured as a prisoner of war and taken to Dresden and experienced the bombing of Dresden shortly before the end of World War II. And so this is a book kind of documenting that. However, what's interesting about Vonnegut, or I don't know about Vonnegut, but about this book, is it shies away from almost all sense of narrative development. Vonnegut plays a fun little trick in this book. He does a little self-insert, whereas so there's the Billy Pilgrim narrative in here, and then there's also the author of the book. And the author of the book is the narrator in the first chapter, and he'll make appearances every once in a while through the book. And that's meant to be like Kurt Vonnegut, because Vonnegut, this is like a semi-memoir, I believe. I believe Vonnegut was actually there for Dresden. So there's this character of the narrator, or the author, and he cites that when he was in school at, I think it was Chicago, learning creative writing, his professors advised him, or I forget if they advised him or if he just like adopted this style, to never have an antagonist. And I remember reading that and thinking, that's so odd. Why? What do you? That's so interesting. And then reading this whole book, there's not an antagonist. There's not an antagonist really in this entire book. If anything, you could paint, I suppose, the droppers of the bombs as antagonists, those who wage war as the antagonists, which that probably is the most antagonistic figure in the book. But there's no villain. There's no real villain. And I think that's really interesting. It makes this book function more as a history and a documentation than it does like a narrative. But that doesn't stop it from being entertaining. It's a very cool book. And the way the time jumps occur, they're not really what I expected. They're incorporated pretty well into the narrative and the character of Billy Pilgrim. It's not just... I was expecting it to be just like jump here, jump there, and you had to piece it together yourself. But Vonnegut writes it in a way that he holds your hand while he jumps time. And he jumps in a way that makes sense. It's not that sporadic. It's easy to follow, and people are right. It is a fun ride. It's also a very easy read. This is not written in difficult prose in the slightest, and it's written in a very digestible way with very, like, frequently broken up paragraphs. So this is a super easy read. One of my professors, I was talking to him about it, and he described it as a book you could read in 48 hours, which I definitely agree with. I didn't read it in 48 hours just because it's been the end of my semester. I've been doing exam stuff, and there's been a lot going on in my life. So I didn't read it quite in 48 hours, but I absolutely could have if I had the time. So yeah, Slaughterhouse-Five, that's the spoiler-free review. Let's get into the spoiler-full review. I think this is just such an interesting way to tell a story about PTSD and veterans. Vonnegut himself in the first chapter keeps describing this as my Dresden book, the book about Dresden. This is not a book about Dresden to me, and I don't think it's meant to be a book about Dresden. This is more a book about veterans, a book about PTSD. I mean, PTSD is a bit on the nose. I like to broaden it to a book about veterans in general, because I think it touches on scopes wider than just PTSD reactions. It touches on their greater place in the world and how they're treated, how they feel they're treated. But it's a very interesting outlook on the bleakness that many soldiers feel after being deployed, coming back from war. How you're thrust into this extremely aggressive and brutal environment where life feels so incredibly arbitrary, and then you're sucked out of that and expected to just participate in real world, and it's hard to grapple with that. He tells this in a very interesting way. The whole time, Billy Pilgrim, he doesn't have much of a character. He's this shell, and I think the fact that he is this shell is so telling of his character. His lack of character is a character in itself. He's such a shell because he doesn't know how to deal with this war. He was deployed when he was 18. He was 18 years old when Dresden got bombed. He was so young, and he had to live the remainder of his life after having experienced and seen the things that he did there. And that's why he reasoned with it through the means of the Kilgore Trout novels and the Tralfamadorians, which, if you don't know, the whole time jumping thing is that's how Billy grapples with his PTSD. He'll go back in time in his mind and re-experience his events, not just the traumatic ones, all of his events. He'll do it with events post-war also. But this feature, he identifies it as a special feature of himself, and he's convinced himself it made him desirable to these aliens called the Tralfamadorians, who abduct him and take them to their planet, and they study him for a few months, I believe, which is only like 10 minutes in Earth time. But they study him, and they bestow upon him a lot of knowledge about time and the universe and how humanity and Earth is experienced by these aliens. And this is where the famous phrase, if you know any phrases from Vonnegut, the biggest one from Slaughterhouse-Five is "so it goes." That's how the Tralfamadorians react to death. They don't really conceptualize death the way people do. They're described as, when seeing a corpse, they don't see that person as dead. They just see them as a particularly bad point in their life, particularly bad state. All of time is laid out for them. There's no like beginning and end. It's all laid out. They describe looking at events and time as looking at like a mountain range where you can see peaks and valleys. It's all on the same thing though, which is a little bit difficult to comprehend, but the way I like to reason with it is thinking that death is not the end and birth is not the beginning, that you existed as an idea before birth and after death, and you exist in all of those moments at the same time, which is interesting. I'll touch a little bit more on "So It Goes" later, but I forget what I was talking about. I remember what I was talking about now. So the whole Tralfamadorian plotline, it doesn't actually happen, or it's not overtly stated that it doesn't happen, but it's hinted that this is a story that he fabricated in his own mind through the readings of, or influenced by these science fiction novels that he had been reading by this guy Kilgore Trout. A lot of the plots in those books strongly align with the Tralfamadorians and the events that Billy Pilgrim claims he experiences. So it's largely implied that he fabricated these scenarios to reason with the events and the feelings that he had. But even still, with this special reasoning, he's still so much of a shell. He's so passive, and I think this conclusion he comes to with time through the Tralfamadorians isn't really like a. It's not really like a aha moment for him. It's more of just the putting it into words. He's still just so much of a shell. It shows that even if you find a way to cope with it, you still aren't free from the effects that it has on you. It's still such a heavy weight. And you see that in so much of his personal life. He doesn't really care about his wife, doesn't really love her at any point. He doesn't really care about his son. He was never really close to him, and his son went into the Green Berets at in Vietnam, and his dad doesn't really, or Billy doesn't really like mourn that at all, despite his brutal experience in the war. The only real semblance of a character, I suppose, that Billy has is that he is like vehemently, maybe not vehemently, but he's very against the makers of arms and like weapons. He doesn't like that, and I think that's a good transition point into who I think, even though this is technically doesn't have an overt antagonist, who I think the antagonist is in this, and it's like I said earlier, all the people who wage war, both good and bad. This isn't like a Allied powers good, Axis powers bad book. This is, there are bad guys on both sides, there are good guys on both sides, because we're all human. We're all human. They, the, I mean the Germans and the Englishmen bonded so well in their POW camp because they saw that humanity in each other. They deconstructed the enemy lines, and they were just people at that point, just following orders. It's the people giving those orders that are viewed as the antagonists, the bad guys. One of the bigger messages I got from this book, just to condense it, is that hate and war is optional, yet it persists. Like, we still do it. It's not, we don't have to fight. We can love each other, but we still do fight. We choose to fight. We choose to send our, as Billy's wife laments, or no, it's Vonnegut's friend's wife. As Vonnegut's friend's wife laments, sending our babies off to war, which in Billy's case, he kind of is a baby. He's 18 years old. Like, I know I'm 20. I can't imagine going to war at 18. I can't imagine going to war now. Definitely not when I was 18. It's insane. And I think this is a lot of that is why I think war literature is so impactful and so important for people to read. Anytime I read war literature, it kind of stops me in my tracks because it brings such a gravity to the story. It brings such a gravity. Books already bring a gravity because you're forced to sit with them for a long time. That's a lot why I enjoy books more than movies and such, is because you're not forced, but you sit with them for longer and you feel more connected with them. And when you bring war to that has that extra gravity, you're like multiplying the gravitation of the story, or I said that wrong. Multiply the gravity of the story to just this extremely heavy, or this book isn't that heavy, I've read heavier, but it's just this extremely heavy feeling. Reading about war is not pleasant, and it's not meant to be pleasant. There's a lot of contention about the idea of if an anti-war novel even exists. Vonnegut even discusses it here. I think it does. I think an anti-war novel absolutely exists. Never have I read a war novel and thought, this is so cool. This is so badass, man. I want to go to war. So maybe I haven't looked into that debate enough, but I think that's a bit of a cynical worldview to think that anti-war literature can exist. Because I think it absolutely does exist. Nothing about this book makes me want to go to war. I feel terrible for every citizen in Dresden that got obliterated by these bombs. I feel bad for Billy Pilgrim, who's just stuck in these train cars in this slaughterhouse, just waiting for the war to end, when the people holding him there don't even really want to hold him there. I absolutely think it's an anti-war book. And this is a bit argumentative, but I struggle to see how people think it isn't. Maybe with the goofiness of the time travel and the aliens, they think it's demeaning or it's like desensitizing. But I think if that's the takeaway you made from this book, then I don't think you really read what Vonnegut was trying to say. So that's that. I'm not trying to make any enemies. I guess one of the last things I want to talk about in terms of spoilers is I want to relate this to another piece of media that some of you might be a bit more familiar with. It's a song by Mac Miller. It's actually called "So It Goes." And I halfway through reading this, I read "So It Goes" in this. He says it so often. I read "So It Goes" in here probably for the 40th time, and I was like, okay, I've heard this before. And it clicked in my head. I was like, Mac Miller has a song called "So It Goes." And so I looked up the lyric. I listened to it, and I looked up the lyrics, and I checked the Genius, and I was like, okay, so this is inspired by Slaughterhouse-five. It was like confirmed that that was where that lyric came from. It wasn't just like a, because I mean, "So It Goes" is not like a unique string of words, but it was inspired by Vonnegut, and it really framed both pieces of media in a different lens for me. You know, it helped me for better understand Mac Miller's song and better understand Vonnegut's book. If you haven't heard the song, I recommend listening to it because it's a great song. But essentially, Mac Miller's talking about the struggles that come with fame and drug addiction and wealth. And he, in the chorus, he says "So it goes" a few times. And the way I interpreted this might not be correct, I don't know, but I don't ever. And a topic for another day. I don't think there is a correct way to interpret art. I think that's the beauty of it, is everyone can get something different from it. It takes on a life of its own. But again, conversation for another day. What I got from it was this was Mac talking about his journey with drug addiction and trying to get clean, and then the inevitable relapse that comes with that. And I think that relapse parallels very well with Vonnegut's idea of death, and that you're not defined by death. Just because you died doesn't mean that you are gone. Your ideas and who you were, the idea of you still persists. Even if you have been dead for 6 months, you're very much alive a year ago in people's memory. You're not ever truly dead. It's just, you're just in a bad state. So it goes. You're not physically here to maintain your image, you know? You try living clean, and then you relapse as a parallel of death. And no, he's trying to say you're not defined by your relapse. Just because you relapsed, you're not dead. It's not over for you. You're just in a particularly bad state in your addiction journey. It's like, oh, he relapsed. Oh, so it goes. People relapse sometimes, you know? And the same way, like, oh, he died. Oh, so it goes. So that's the way I viewed that in the song in relation to this. And it's why I love reading, I guess you could call this a classic. I don't know. That's why I like reading influential literature, is because you can pick apart these little references that you didn't even know you were getting, and you can connect them, and it enriches the experience of both. I heard "So It Goes" way before I read Slaughterhouse-five, and so being able to apply my understanding of that song to this new book made me enjoy the book even more, and then being able to apply what I know about the origin of that phrase from the book onto the song I'd already heard made me enjoy the song even more. It led to this positive feedback loop of me enjoying both medias more because I could understand the references and what they were tying off of. So yeah, that's a cool thing to look into if you enjoy either the song or this book. And it's a lot of the reason why I like I said, reading influential literature and consuming influential media is in order to make those connections. I think it's what it's all about. It's what art's all about, you know? So, final rating. I enjoyed this. You know, this is a bit simple. That sounds really pretentious to say. Let me just disclaimer. It's a bit simple for my taste. It felt very... Vonnegut does not really do a whole lot literary-wise in this book. It's very blunt, very to the point. I mean, that's kind of his style. That's what he does. Like, it's not like a flaw in this book. That's just his style, you know? And I think I look for a little bit more depth for when I read. So this wasn't the most like engaging read for me, but it was. I mean, it was a page turner, and it was still enjoyable. So and the takeaways I made from it were pretty impactful for me. I liked them, but like I said, it the lack of a direct antagonist and direct storyline in general, it it kind of strips away the narrative from the book. There doesn't exactly seem to be a super strong narrative. Like I said, it's more of a history, which again has its place and it works very well in this book. But I think I personally gravitate a little bit more to narratives, you know. But it's always fun to step out of your comfort zone and try something new because some people do it very well, like Vonnegut does in this book. So it's important to try things, even if you don't think you'll like them very much, or it's not what you typically read. So I would give this a 4-star. I think this is a great book. It wasn't amazing. It didn't wow me the way I know it wowed some people. But I think this is great, and it makes me interested to read some more Vonnegut. I want to read The Sirens of Titan. I had that personally recommended to me by the professor I mentioned earlier. He's a Vonnegut nut, so he recommended that. He also recommended Cat's Cradle. He liked that one. So I want to check those two out, and then one that I personally want to check out is Galapagos. I was alerted of that recently, and the premise of that seems very interesting. So I'd like to explore that. And now knowing how Vonnegut writes, I think it would be interesting to see how he tells that story. So yeah, Slaughterhouse-five. If you guys like this review or you want to talk about the book, feel free to leave a comment. Make sure you drop a like. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next one. See ya.